Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today we're going to talk about the recently announced new card buffs, nerfs, the read nerfs, all the good stuff that has happened this week in terms of already launched changes and upcoming changes to the game. There's a lot of stuff here. I wanted to cover this on the first day that they actually announced it, but I was on my trip to New York City and Manhattan with Rania, and we had a pretty packed schedule with all different adventures, and you guys that have followed us on Twitter and Instagram, links below for that by the way, know all the craziness that's happened. So it wasn't really possible for us to get a quick video right away because we didn't know when they were going to announce it or anything like that. So we basically have to do the video now. But there actually is an advantage to that. We actually get to see the impact of the nerfs because the nerfs actually went live a few days ago. So we actually have a lot more context to what's happening than just, hey guys, here's what's going on. And a lot of you guys have asked for my opinion on these matters. So here we go. First up, we are all getting for free. You just log in. I believe it's when the patch happens. I believe it's early June, like 3rd or 4th of June, something like that. I don't know if it's announced exactly. In any case, we all get Snip Snap. And Snip Snap basically guarantees a mechanized, magneticized meta for quite some time. At least until this card rotates out, because this card is crazy. Like, holy crap, is it crazy. We've had some echo buff effects in Paladin that have made it to extremely powerful levels in Arena and actual, decent competitive levels in Constructed, and this is much better than that because it's not just a buff. It's potentially a buff with the Magnetic, it's potentially a large buff with the Echo and Magnetic, and it's potentially just something that you play on turn 3. Is it good enough to do that? It can be. You get the Death Rattle effect. This card is just absolutely ridiculous. We're not doing like a star rating system because it's just one card, but trust me, anyone with their eyes open would rate this card 5 full stars because it is actually that good. It is so good, in fact, that people immediately started being a little bit triggered because, well, if it has Echo, can't you just discount it and play it a whole bunch on an existing mech? Basically pushing some kind of magneticized OTK combo? The answer is yes, you could do that. You could do that through Mech Warper, which is a card in Wild that reduces the cost of mechs by 1, playing 2 of them, maybe a Faceless, a few other ways you could do it. Wild is Wild, So you can do it in Wild, you can always do it in Wild. There's always crazy combos in Wild. That's not what people are really concerned about. People started being concerned about, and I did tweet about this, the first instance that someone even suggested it, Reckless Experimenter. It's currently in Standard, it would certainly make Priest pretty viable. Basically, if you had Reckless Experimenter, you play it on turn 5 and you had a mech from the previous turn, you play Snip Snap as many times as you want for 0 mana, and then you kill your opponent. Because it does infinite damage, because you can just play as many as you want, because they all cost 0. So it turns out a 2-card infinite damage combo on turn 5 for Standard Priest is probably a little bit too good. So a few days passed and Blizzard actually announced a bonus nerf, and we'll get to the nerfs into a second, a bonus nerf coming live with Snip Snap. So this nerf is not live as opposed to the other ones. Reckless Experimenter cannot reduce the cost of anything below 1. So that is a pretty sizable nerf. However, it's still a really good card. This combo is still very good. If you have a mech from the previous turn, you can Reckless Experimenter and play 5 of them. I mean, that's insane. Still, right? And if you're playing a bunch of other Death Rattles, Reckless Experimenter is actually not that bad of a card at all. So, yes, it's a nerf to just absolutely obscene levels of OTK with Priest. But it's still a pretty strong combo, and Snip Snap is certainly going to make waves in Hearthstone once it goes live. It's once it goes out to everyone for free, because that's what's going to happen. All right. So the other changes are also pretty significant. They're nerfing some pretty key cards to try to, shuffle up the meta a little bit. And they're buffing, I think it's like 18 cards, something crazy. The nerfs have already happened. They've been out for a few days now. The buffs are coming with Snip Snap in early June. So because this video is actually coming a couple of days after the announcement and the nerfs went live like immediately, we actually get to go over the stats and talk about the immediate impact of the nerfs. It's pretty cool, right? All right, so let's do it. First off, they nerfed Evil Miscreant. they made the card a 4 health minion instead of a 5 health minion. And you might think, that's not really much of a nerf at all. That's certainly what I thought. That's certainly what everyone thought on Reddit, on the comments, on everything that I read. But it turns out these stats, the parameters for these statistics, are on Hearthstone Replay. It is within the legend ranks and rank 1 through 5, so the fairly competitive ranks of the game. You can see that Evil Miscreant actually kind of sucks. It's below a 50% win rate in the deck and when played, but I think there is an important consideration here. A lot of the time when cards get nerfed, some people just play the nerfed decks anyway, so it might not be that the card is that bad, it might be that the deck is actually kind of bad, and people just haven't bothered to actually make new decks. It is still a little bit early, and I think whatever win rates that we see from these cards, in this video at least, they're probably going to be a little bit higher in the weeks to come. With that said, that's a pretty big nerf in terms of win rate. Evil Miscreant was causing havoc in Constructed, in Arena. I saw it at times pushing 55, 56% win rate. Going below 50 is a pretty massive hit. Evil Miscreant is actually a relatively mediocre card just by nerfing it from 5 health to 4. So, pretty crazy. Certainly surprised me, and certainly we learned something this time around. Raiding Party is another card that's nerfed, also for Rogue. Turns out Rogue is actually rather powerful. Raiding Party is going to 4 mana instead of 3. That doesn't seem too big of a nerf until we get to the preparation nerf here shortly. You guys already know about that, but yeah, so Raiding Party was a card that was used at 3 mana, typically in combination with Preparation to get a whole bunch of cards that combo with one another, because pirates combo off of large weapons, and that's basically cards that are good to play in Rogue anyway. So Raiding Party going for 3 mana to 4 in addition to the prep nerf that we'll discuss in a moment. It seems like the card would really suck. Actually, Raiding Party is still pretty decent. It's still sporting over 50% win rate in the same rank brackets as I mentioned earlier. These are stats from the last 3 days, so all post-nerf, and they are within the competitive regions of Hearthstone, let's say. And in those, Raiding Party is still pretty decent. You have to keep in mind, in the most competitive formats, sporting a win rate of over 51%, that's solid. It turns out, even though Raiding Party sucks a lot more now, just having any kind of powerful targeted card draw at any point in Hearthstone is actually pretty good. So, turns out the Raiding Party nerf was actually very fair. Moving on to the Preparation nerf, Prep is going from a 3 mana discount to a 2 mana discount, and that is a huge deal if you really want to think about it. If you remember just some months back before Innervate got nerfed, Innervate just gave you 2 mana for a 0. Prep now gives you a discount of 2 mana just for spells, right? So, I mean, that's a lot worse. Okay. Obviously, Innervate got nerfed. So, Blizzard's trying to lower the power level of these mana accelerants, understandably. And now, Preparation, you'd imagine it's a pretty big nerf. And it is a pretty big nerf, but with the same statistics parameters that we just talked about in the last few cards. We actually see Preparation doing okay. It's not like the worst card ever. It's not hopeless or anything like that. But yeah, it's a pretty large hit. You're talking about Preparation, a card that's been out nearly 6 years now. The whole time Hearthstone has been a game. I don't think it's ever had less than 50% win rate ever throughout that entire period. And here we are, below the 50% margin. So a pretty sizable nerf to Preparation. It's kind of bad for the identity of the class for Rogue, but it'll obviously still be included in like Miracle and Super Combo decks. But, at the same time, for the sake of balance, it's probably on the fair side. The last nerf is Archivist Elysiana. It's moving from an 8 mana card into a 9 mana card, and the reasoning behind this is that a lot of players playing extremely slow, super control warrior, super control priest, they would run Archivist Elysiana with return effects either through pandas, or priests have the sea ants. Just to get a copy, just to play it again and again and again. And a lot of those games would go really long to a point where both players would lose because of the turn timer that I believe is turn 45. So if both players are playing slow control decks with more removal than actual minions, and both of them have the ability to play Archivist Elysiana 3 times, that game literally ends in a draw almost all of the time. but it takes like 40 minutes to actually get to that point. So those games kind of suck. So I'm actually a pretty big fan of the nerf of this card. It doesn't really affect much in terms of the game overall. If you look at the stats, once again, with the same parameters as the last ones that we saw, the card is still extremely good. You know, if you're playing a control deck and you make it to like turn 8 or turn 9, you get to play this, you still have an extremely high win rate in those matches. So no doubt this card got a very fair nerf. It just accelerates the really, really slow control mirrors that you might face on ladder. Now, in terms of the buffs, there are quite a lot of them, but these are not live yet, so we don't get to see the impact of the buffs, and you'll have to basically trust my opinion, which is pretty good, I'd say, most of the time. Goop Sprayer is a 7-cost 4/4 now. It used to cost 8. The effect is exactly the same. In terms of the power level of the card, it's certainly on the upswing. More importantly, because in the Lucent Bark decks, which is one that it was included in, you would sometimes use the Juicy Psych Melon, and now the Goop Sprayer costs a different mana cost than Lucent Bark. Lucent Bark is at 8, and now Lucent Bark is at 7. So not only is it a better card just because it costs less mana, but it's actually easier to draw and combo in a deck that it's actually already in. That's pretty good. So is Goop Sprayer going to be like meta defining? No, probably not, but it's going to be a little better, and it's going to increase the deck pool of like tier 2 decks, which we know that the larger that pool is, the more fun it is to actually play Hearthstone. So good stuff. Mulch Muncher is going from a 10 mana card to a 9 mana card. So if you lose a few trance, you basically get to play this a lot faster. Is that worth it? Nah, probably not. The card probably is still pretty useless. If it was good at 10 mana, it would still be about as good as 9 mana, and it wasn't really good at 10 mana, so I don't think it's really a big enough buff. It'd probably need like to go to 7 mana or something to actually be good in Constructed. Constructed is just really cutthroat. You need the best of the best, and with a 1 mana discount, Mulch Muncher doesn't really make the cut still. Necro Mechanic, however, just might. Necro Mechanic is currently a 5 mana card, and we're going to see a 4 mana variant of it. Your death rattles trigger twice. That's insane, because you get basically a water elemental worth of stats. It's a 4-cost 3/6. That's unbelievably good. At Hunter especially, where you're always playing the tempo game. Even the control hunters, you still need to have a strong tempo base, because that's the only way you can actually keep control over the game. You don't really have massive board clears playing Hunter. So a very good statted 4-drop is much better than a weak statted 5-drop just for the card itself. In terms of the combo potential, well, you have 1 less mana to worry about. 4 mana is much higher combo potential. So Necro Mechanic, I thought was a pretty fair card at 5. Now, it's certainly fair, but it wasn't game-breaking. Now, at 4, it might actually be game-breaking. It is an extremely good card. Flark's Boom Zuka is receiving a buff. There's certainly some cool things that you can do with the Boom Zuka, but none of them really cool enough. Moving from 7 mana from 8 doesn't really increase your option pool that much. It's okay. It's just, once again, one of those cards. If you're playing it anyway, you're a little bit happy, but no one was really playing Boom Zuka previously, so it is what it is. But it is a card that might get a gigantic buff if we get really powerful Death Rattle minions in Hunter. So we'll see. Unexpected Results is moving from 4 mana to 3. A 3 mana spawn 2 random 2-drops. That's just a pretty good card. It also makes it much easier to combo with spell damage effects, so Unexpected Results is going to move from a pretty mediocre card into a very good card, once again, likely increasing the overall pool of the number of tier 2 decks available in the game. Luna's Pocket Galaxy going from 7 mana to 5 mana. Wow, that's a pretty big deal. That's certainly a huge increase in viability. The main way that people use Luna's Pocket Galaxy in Constructed is with decks revolving around infinite damage combos and Antonius and all that kind of stuff. If it ever landed on a few select combo pieces, it let you achieve that goal a lot easier. Now, at 5 mana, it's a lot more playable than at 7, but those decks were inherently very inconsistent already, so my hopes are not particularly high for it, but again, best case, another tier 2 deck, I'll take it. Christology, new mana cost from 2 to 1. Draw 2 1-attack minions is a very strong effect. I used this card in the best version of the OTK Bazooka Din in the last expansion, and I believe in this one as well. It's just a very powerful card draw at 2 mana, and at 1 mana, it's actually top tier. This card is unbelievably strong, moving from 2 mana to 1 mana. Yes, these are all 1 mana discounts that we've talked about so far, but moving from a 2 mana card to a 1 mana card, that's a 50% discount. And if you know your discounts, that's a big one, okay? Christology was already viable. Slashing its mana cost in half is a giant deal. This is a card that is going to be played in every single control paladin that involves any kind of combo, and it's probably going to be played in a number of aggressive paladins as the tempo drop is not there anymore. If you draw 2 1-attack minions for 2 mana, you actually lose a little bit of tempo. 1-drops are very high tempo, but you actually just lose the card of them playing. So at 1 mana, you can catch up off the tempo of playing 2 1-attack minions. So very, very strong effect, even in aggro decks. Aggro pally? We shall see. Glowstone Technician is moving from 6 mana to 5. Now, the card had a pretty powerful effect, but no one actually knows this card exists, so people just probably forget it exists still. But, you know, you can't call it a bad card. It's a pretty good card. It's just, yeah, it's tough to really use properly, so I don't know. I have a little hope for the card, but it'll probably just be some fun B-tier decks. Cloning Advice is moving from 2 mana to 1. Probably not worth playing in Constructed, because in Constructed, the cards you want to include in your deck, you want them to be intentional. It's not like Arena. In Arena, this card will be a lot stronger, but in Constructed, still about as useless, I imagine. Extra Arms is moving from costing 3 to costing 2. That's a pretty big deal, potentially. Now, Zoo Priest is not an archetype that has really flourished since basically Undertaker Priest with Dark Cultist way, way, way back in the day. Now, can Extra Arms change that? It's actually possible. Priests have very powerful vanilla 1-drops like Northshire Cleric. If you can do Northshire Cleric on 1, have it survive. Extra Arms, you have a 3/5 with charge on turn 2, basically. A 2-drop, because Extra Arms doesn't actually cost a card the first time you play it, because it produces a card. So you have to think about it this way. You're playing a 2-drop that's 3/5 charge as Priest on turn 2. Kind of. Is that good? That's really good. So yes, it's possible that Zoo Priest might get a bit of a buff. Pogo Hopper. Pogo Hopper is going to 1 mana instead of 2. Now, again, that's a 50% mana discount, and that's a pretty big deal because Pogo Hopper is a card that's basically inherently a combo card. You rarely just play Pogo Hopper and pass the turn. Typically, you play like double Battle Cry, you play a bunch of return effects, you do whatever you might. You do that all in the same turn that you initially play Pogo Hopper. So having a 1 mana discount is actually a pretty big deal in a lot of cases. Now, I want to remind you guys that Rogue as a class was just nerfed severely, and that Pogo Hopper right now, within the ranks of ladder that actually matter, it's a low 30% win rate deck. So this is a pretty nice buff. But I don't think it's anywhere near enough, though I'm sure I'll try it and stick around on YouTube to see how those experiments work out nonetheless. Violet Haze is going from 3 mana to 2, excellent in Arena, pretty irrelevant in Constructed. Thunderhead is, well, its mana cost is not being adjusted. It's actually just getting an extra stat point. But an extra stat point is a really big deal. Again, Shaman is one of those classes where tempo matters a lot. A 4 mana 3/6 is super premium. That's like the best stats for 4 mana. So Thunderhead, which is an elemental, it's a strong 4-drop to begin with. It has synergy with Overload, which is inherently very strong in the last few years in Hearthstone. It is now also a super premium statted card. Yeah. Does that compete with Murloc Shaman? Maybe, maybe not. But it's still a very good card standalone. This will be one of the best cards in Arena, and I think it is going to be Constructed powerful. Just that. We might need another expansion or 2 with powerful Overload cards until it actually becomes tier 1. The Stormbringer, it's going to be costing 6 mana, same effect. Now, no one actually used the Stormbringer in their decks, but there's been a lot of Shaman decks. Even the Murloc Shamans heavily rely on Hagatha. And because there's so many minions that you generate in those decks, a lot of the time you actually get quite consistently this card through the Hagatha Shaman hero card. So the fact that this card is going from 7 mana to 6 mana doesn't really affect you putting it in a deck, but it does make those decks that quite regularly generate the card, and trust me, often win off of it, and it is a combo card because you want to play minions alongside this card, makes those decks a bit better. Now, you might be thinking, well, how much better is it going to make those decks? We don't know, but I can tell you that right now, Murloc Shaman is one of, if not the best decks in the game in the low ranks of Hearthstone, and that deck is getting a buff through this card. Spirit Bomb costs 1 less. Does it matter? Not really. Might increase the combo potential of Warlock, but probably not. Dr. Morgan is moving from 8 mana to 6 mana. It's still a 5/5, and the Death Rattle still gives you the replace effect. Is that worth it? It is possible. I played a decent bit of Shuffle Lock, and with this card costing 2 less mana, I would certainly think about playing it. And is Shuffle Lock that good? No, it's probably a bottom tier 2 deck or near the top of tier 3 decks, but a small buff might bring the deck into a pool of decks where people actually play them. Security Rover is getting a 1 health buff. Is that relevant? Again, yeah, because Control Warrior is not really getting much of a change. Yes, Elysiana is going to 9 mana, it's already 9 mana, but that doesn't really affect too many matchups. Control Warrior is just as good against aggro decks, and that's basically what it's designed to be good against. Nobody plays Security Rover, and nobody will play Security Rover, but through the different hero powers and Omega assemblies that Dr. Boom Control Warrior is involved in, they often enough get this card, and having an extra health point actually does make a bit of a difference. Having an extra health point on this card might mean an additional 2/3 taunt mech, and considering your win condition within those decks is to stall out your opponent, that's pretty good. On that same note, the final card buffed on this list that's coming up in early June, Beryllium Nullifier. Once again, not a card you'd include in those Control Warrior decks, but it's actually one of the highest, before the buff, one of the highest played win rate cards in the game. It just creates a situation that your opponent can't deal with. If you have a big mech and you Beryllium Nullify it, you basically just have the game for the next several turns until your opponent can clear it off the board. So once again, no warriors playing that card specifically, but there's so much card mech generation specifically in Control Warrior that these buffs are actually relevant to those classes. Overall, I feel like the nerfs and the buffs are quite sensible, all while actually changing the metagame somewhat. And I do want to commend Blizzard on basically acting this way. I know it's been many years and many of you guys may have forgotten, or many of you guys have actually started watching our videos and our content more recently than the last time we talked about this. But not long after Hearthstone was released, I made a video talking about buffing bad cards, because I feel like there's so many cards in Hearthstone and so many of them are just not used. Now that's fine if you had a real life card game, because the cards are like pieces of cardboard. It's very difficult to actually change them, and inevitably some will be good, some won't be good. It's very difficult to predict which ones will be bad and which ones will be good. You guys know that very well. I know that from my card reviews. Now, with that said, those things that end up being failures in, real life card games, they just remain failures because, it's too hard to change it. But Hearthstone is a digital card game, and in a digital card game, it's very easy to change things. It's so easy to just improve cards that have no chance of seeing play, or even those that are marginal and do have some chance, to actually change the game in a way that doesn't involve releasing a new paid expansion. And that's what Blizzard has finally done. Many years ago, when I made that video suggesting that Blizzard buff bad cards, I still got a pretty worthy response. Ben Brode made his own video talking about why and why not they buff bad cards. Mostly why not, because they never did until today. But you know what? We finally got justice. Hearthstone's buffing cards. The Hearthstone dev team right now is actually listening to the suggestions that so many of us have put out there over the years, because let me tell you, there's a lot of good suggestions out there, and it's a real breath of fresh air to see at least the devs trying them. Is this, going to completely change the game in a positive way? Probably, at least a little bit. That's my take. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.